If you have your Bibles, I invite you to go ahead and open up to 1 Samuel chapter 19. 1 Samuel chapter 19 is where we're going to spend our time tonight. Of course, we've been going through, if you've been here, then you know we've been working our way through 1 Samuel as kind of an overview of the Old Testament, and we've honed in here. We're working our way through this. Remember last week, or last couple weeks really, it's set off in chapter 16, David killing Goliath, a story that we're all very familiar with, in 17 rather. And then last week, of course, King Saul. This is the very end of the period of the judges, beginning of the period of the kings. Saul is Israel's pick. Like they have demanded, right? And God continued to push back and push back. That is essentially the period of the judges, is God's compromise, if you will. But they continue to push, and so Saul becomes king. And I just can't overstate the theme of seeing King Saul, and then certainly as we get further into 2 Samuel, seeing David as king. David's not a perfect man, but in so many ways he is God's pick, right? I think there's a lot of encouragement there, because again, David's not perfect. So we're not looking to David as this perfect character study like we might of Christ, where he did nothing wrong and we can emulate everything. But David is a very realistic, in many ways, character study for us, because he does a lot right. He pushes and relies on God most of the time. And I think you'll appreciate his time as king even more when we work through all the material that we have up to this point, because you're going to recognize that he's going to spend 10, 15 years waiting. If there's no other reason why I think David was a tremendous king, was his ability to wait, willingly wait on Saul to be removed from the picture. Remember, Saul and Jonathan are going to go be killed in battle. David's not going to have a hand in that, but he's willing to wait. He has opportunities to take Saul out and expedite this, what most of us would do, what I would be chomping at the bit to do, not necessarily just to take someone, but the impatience in us want things to happen now. And certainly when you recognize that David is going to be king of Israel, his ability to stand back and recognize God's timing and say, Saul is still the anointed king, I think is a tremendous character ability that David has that we never touch on. But you'll appreciate recognizing that he's on the run in all of this. So we get into 19. Again, last week, we actually did 2 weeks on 18. This was David and Jonathan, this covenantal friendship. Again, I encourage you to go back, reread these. Saul becomes increasingly jealous of David, because remember, David is going to go out and they're going to come out and sing to David, and they're going to ascribe to David, not that he has done this, but to Saul's thousands, you have David's tens of thousands, and Saul's going to hear this, and it's going to drive him crazy, right? And so we're going to really pick up in 19, where Saul is going to try to kill David, right? And we're going to look through this and look as we look down through. We look into the story, and I want to read some of this. So Saul spoke to Jonathan, his son, and to all his servants, and they should kill David. But Jonathan, Saul's son, delighted much in David, and Jonathan told David, Saul, my father, seeks to kill you, therefore be on your guard this morning. And we look in this, and you're going to recognize automatically this beautiful relationship, and Jonathan is going to preempt some things with Saul. Saul has already, in many ways, tried to kill David. Remember, go back to 18, and the spears are going to slip multiple times, but David is going to evade this. But this is going to be the first of many plans from Saul to get rid of David. We've talked about this already. This becomes an overarching theme of the last bit of Saul's life. Certainly the last of him as king is going to be in one way or another trying to get rid of David. Some subtle, some not so subtle. So again, let's read the first three. So Saul spoke to Jonathan, his son, and to all his servants. Now remember, reference back to 18, because remember David, it tells us explicitly that not only was David loved by his peers, but that all of the servants of Saul's house loved David. The people loved David. The soldiers loved David. So this is going to come to play. Make notes in your Bible, because Saul is going to put everyone in kind of a precarious situation when he's going to just outright lay his plan out, like every terrible movie villain, certainly in the shows like my kids watch, where like the villain will do this big like dialogue and tell you the plan ahead of time, right? That just always cracks me up. That's essentially what he's going to do. He's going to tell everybody what he wants to do. I want to kill and get rid of David. Now, Jonathan, it's going to put the servants in a spot because remember, they love David. David, in many ways, is their redeemer. Now, Saul hates that because he's king, but he took down Goliath. And in many ways, again, we don't see multiple realities here. But remember, had Goliath not been taken out, they would all be subservient to the Philistines at this point. I mean, that was the ultimatum, essentially, right? Somebody comes and fights me. If we win, right? And you remember this. So they view David to put him on a pedestal is putting it lightly. So it puts the servants in a tough spot, right? It's going to put Jonathan in a tough spot, and it's going to put David in a tough spot. Saul spoke to Jonathan, his son, and to all his servants, and they should kill David. But Jonathan, Saul's son, delighted much in David. I hope you underline that line. That is in a sentence, that really sums up their bond. And this is one of those where you see it expressed by Jonathan to David, but you can find equal number of David to Jonathan. It's not one way, it is reciprocated. Like I said, Jonathan is going to die much earlier than David is. He's going to die with his father out in battle. And remember, I've told you this before, remember later on in Samuel, David is going to fulfill the promise to Jonathan that I'm going to take care of your family. Remember, he does this through Mephibosheth much later, right? Is there anybody left of the lineage of Saul? And he finds Mephibosheth and gives them back the land and things like this. So we know it's reciprocated here, but Jonathan sustains the early part of their relationship. If not for Jonathan, that's tough to say. I was about to say, without Jonathan, David very well may not have made it to the time as king. God anointed him as king. God is going to do a lot to preserve him as king. Again, the Spirit of the Lord is with David, and we get a very clear sense, even more so in chapter 19, that part of that is providentially protecting David, whether that be through people like Jonathan. Again, you go back to 18 when the spears are flying, all it says is David evaded. Does that mean he, by the Spirit's ability, evaded? I don't know. I do get the sense that Saul is a pretty good shot. I mean, again, he is not the king because he has no military experience. He is a warrior. So the fact that he just missed David, I have never interpreted that to be from lack of ability. Now, again, that's Keaton's inference. We're not trying to take something that's not there. But one way or another, you call it lucky, you call it providential, but David is evading this over and over. And again, he's going to use Jonathan to do this. So God picked David, but Jonathan is going to play a part in sustaining David till the point that he becomes king, which is wild because Jonathan on paper should be king. We talked about that last week and even 2 weeks ago. Remember, Jonathan's going to take off his garments and give them to David, not just his cloak, but he's going to give him his armor, his shield, his sword, his robe, the things that had in value to demonstrate you should be king. You will be king. And he's going to do that for David. Saul, my father, seeks to kill you. Therefore, be on your guard in the morning. Stay in a secret place and hide yourself. I encourage you to underline that line. That's going to come, that is foreshadowing. That is direct and indirect foreshadowing. That is going to play a role in 19, but from then until the time that David is going to be properly put on the throne, this idea of being on the run and going and hiding and being in a secret place, that's going to be a regular theme of David's life. He is going to have to go on the run multiple times because Saul is going to continually, I read it somewhere, we don't approve of Satan's methods or Satan's intentions, but you got to commend his persistence, right? And that's what's happening here. I mean, again, Saul, he is persistent. if nothing else, if you take nothing else away from the Saul of the latter portion of his life, he is not a quitter. And he's going to continue to pursue David over and over again. Again, Jonathan is his son. It puts him in such a difficult place. I made the notation back to 1 Samuel 18, 1 through 4. Again, that's that covenantal relationship that they had. 1 Samuel 18 and verse 5 tells us all the servants love David. But again, Jonathan, his son, delighted in David, telling him, my father is seeking to kill you. And so we look at this, and again, it puts Jonathan in an interesting spot. Again, you know, we are called scripturally to love and respect our parents. That's its own lesson unto itself. We have done lessons on how does the Christian assimilate into, you know, government and things where people give us instruction. How do we do all this? Jonathan's a good example of he follows after government and leadership, which just happens to also be his father, and so there's the mother-father dynamic there. But all of it comes secondary to the will of God, and what I believe God would have me to do comes first. And so when we look at this, again, you recognize above everything else, in this case, Jonathan viewed it, this would be wrong, this would be sinful to obey Saul and kill Jonathan, or to kill David. David's done nothing wrong. You only want him out of the way for your own greed. And so Jonathan is circumventing not only the government, but his parents. They just happen to be one and the same there. But again, this is not a lesson on that, but it does give us one of the few probably practical examples. I'll be Old Testament, but you want an example of what do I do when, if, maybe hopefully only if, you know, government or leadership or job wants me to do something that violates what I know is instructed to me by God. Well, you do what Jonathan did. You maintain what God has instructed as right and wrong, and there is no employer, there is no governor, there's no president in the world that gets to redefine that. Jonathan is that guy, right? You know, and this is a whole nother lesson, but my mind went to Acts chapter 5. Right? I mean, the early Christians were in this boat, right? Jonathan I love because it's an example we don't go to often, but Acts 5 and verse 29, again, you know, all throughout the apostles in Acts 5, they were beaten, they suffered, they were willing to suffer, but they said that they rejoiced in it, they counted it worthy to suffer for the name of Christ because they knew what they were suffering for was the true highest call, right? I mean, you think of it in a stack of operations, and it's not that they're trying to just spit on government or say we're unwilling to, but it's saying God's will is first. Everything else comes beneath that. We're willing to suffer for it, die for it if need be. And Jonathan's going to be willing to pay whatever price is necessary to obey God. But he says, my father Saul is seeking to kill you. Be on your guard, right? Jonathan did more than just refuse to help Saul. He actively went to support David. There's probably a distinction there somewhere of, am I just willing to not cause harm? Right? Jonathan could have just said, I'm not going to be the one to do this. I love David, so I'm not going to be the one to, you know, pull the trigger, quote unquote. But that's not his posture. He's saying, not only am I not going to be the one, I'm going to go help David. I'm going to go actively contribute to making sure David stays safe. He says, I'm not going to be a part of this, and I'm not going to let anybody else be either. All right, let's keep reading. So we're going to pick up here in verse 3. I will go out and stand beside my father in the field where you are, and I'll speak to my father about you, and if I learn anything, I'll tell you. And Jonathan spoke well of David to Saul, his father. Just imagine the bravery, the gumption to go. Again, Saul has just come in like very villain plot armor type way and say, I'm going to just kill David. That's my grand plan. And he's going to come back to dad and say, man, isn't David great? Right? I mean, that's what he's doing. Jonathan loves him that much. I mean, beautiful story. And there's a lot about Jonathan to love. He spoke well of David to Saul, his father, and said to him, let not the king, now let's connect this to Sunday morning, did not plan this, but what does he say? Let not the king sin against his servant David, right? Jonathan willing to call sin, sin. He's telling his dad, the king, what you're talking about is not just a mistake, it's not just wrong, it's sin. It's sin because not only is it wrong, but it violates the will of God more importantly. Because he, David, has not sinned against you, and because his deeds have brought good to you. Verse 5, for he took his life in his hand and struck down the Philistine. Of course, talking about Goliath. Although again, David, to get the dowry to marry his current wife, one of the daughters of King Saul, killed more Philistines, so it's not just Goliath, although the Philistine is almost always referencing Goliath. And the Lord worked a great salvation for all of Israel. Now, again, imagine Saul, who is already mentally unstable, right? We know this, that's not just like a description. The Spirit of the Lord, the destructive spirit that has come, again, we don't believe that is a direct harmful spirit given by God. It really reads in the original language in the grammar more like, a sleeping dog in Samuel in Saul that's always been there. And now the protection of God is gone, and now it's able to just run rampant. But he's going to tell this paranoid, angry, vengeful king, who happens to be his dad, reread this with me. The Lord worked a great salvation. Why? Through David. You saw it and you rejoiced. Why then will you sin against innocent blood by killing David without cause? This is Jonathan really loving David in a tremendous way, went to speak to him. Again, did more than just secret information here, went and spoke well to Jonathan or to David or to Saul, knowing that it could cause himself harm. Again, Jonathan could not have been naive to the fact that Saul is losing his mind in some forms or fashions. I mean, he is actively getting more and more paranoid over David, over everybody else. Let not the king sin against you. Again, Saul, and there's a great sub lesson here. Saul felt like David had sinned against him. Saul, I truly believe the text would point us to the fact that Saul, in whatever part of his mind, believed David to be wrong. But believing something to be wrong and it being wrong are two different things. Right? Again, that's why when we look at objective truth, it'll come up a lot in our Truth Over Trend next month. You and I, that's the beauty. One of the beauties of the Word is it gives us objective truth, right and wrong, as defined by the Creator, to where it's not subjective to you and me. Because Saul feels like David's done me wrong, but he's also going crazy. So again, that's not an accurate measure, but to Saul, that's probably reality. You and I, we recognize, again, are we going by God's definition or are we going by something we created? He's saying David took his life in his hands and killed the Philistine, and the Lord brought about this great deliverance. That's one of the great lessons, I think, of the Old Testament that the Israelites did better than almost every Christian that I know, myself included. They had this great understanding of remembrance. Thinking back, what David is doing is just reminding Saul of what's already happened. He's saying, King, Dad, don't you remember? He delivered us. You were there. You rejoiced. You partook in all the great things. You're standing here today because of him. You and I could probably take a page out of that playbook. Do we think back to God's deliverance very often? My fear is we don't. Saul knew all of this, knew that David killed the Philistine, but could not could not come to terms with David. Again, Saul wanted the prestige. He wanted the power. He wanted all the earthly things, and he cannot reconcile. And that's why Saul is not going to be king long term, because Saul can't wrestle to the ground the fact that there is somebody out here that, in spite of it being with God's blessing, is more popular than me, is more famous than me, right? Is in some ways more powerful than me because David's got the people behind him, right? You and I, we look and say, Saul, you had everything. David, all David wanted to do was be in your corner. Again, go back to just one chapter before us when Saul is offering his daughters. Remember, David is humbled to be before the king. But Saul can't see it. He's blind because all he wants is for himself. And that's going to continue. That is his Achilles heel and what will ultimately get him killed with his son. Why? This is, again, Jonathan talking to Saul. Why then will you sin against innocent blood to kill David without cause? Jonathan is calling Saul back to reality. He's demanding Saul to come back to reality. And that's, again, you and I, however we parse out situations in our life of you and I, people hurt us. We have things that we're frustrated with. We have trouble that we have all kinds of things that are heavy on our heart. But the challenge is to be like Jonathan and sometimes be yanked back to reality and be anchored in scriptural truth of sometimes it's not about what we want. It's about what is true and right. And that's what Jonathan is really demanding of Saul here in a beautiful way. And now notice his response. We're going to look in 6 and 7. So Saul listened to the voice of Jonathan. Saul swore, "As the Lord lives, he shall not be put to death." And Jonathan called David, and Jonathan reported to him all these things. And Jonathan brought David to Saul, and he was in his presence as before. Now, no additional language here, but I think you can read between the lines of David's relationship with Jonathan. Would you go before Saul after he has at least tried to kill you twice, and you're hearing through a very reliable source, he's coming after you again? You know Jonathan's not the only one telling him. Again, remember, everyone loves David. You know some of the servants went and told him. Some of the other people in the military went and told him. David is hearing this from all directions. Saul wants you dead. And Jonathan is now reporting all of this back. And somehow is convincing David, go stand before Saul. Come with me to stand before Saul. It's tough to quantify an earthly relationship that would invoke that level of trust. But he had it, right? I mean, I can count on one hand the number of people that I trust that emphatically. That, again, against all logic, if they said, I need you to come with me, I'm going to come. That's where Jonathan and David are. He heard the voice of Jonathan. And again, a character study of Saul. He gets raked through the coals. We've done it, right? He is in many ways out of his mind. But then you see little glimmers of what, because remember, in the beginning, Saul was a good king. Saul was a godly king. And here you see this little tidbit of humility to admit, Jonathan, you're right. And it's interesting how he swears it, right? He says, as the Lord lives, as the God of Israel lives, David will not be killed. And Jonathan brought him in his presence as in times past. It seems everything has worked. The command to kill David has been revoked. Saul and David are together again. Now, we know that's not going to stay, but it happened for the moment, right? We'll have to work. We're going to work quickly to finish up tonight. And there was war again. We're in verse 8. And David went out and fought with the Philistines and struck them with a great blow. So they fled before them. Then a harmful spirit from the Lord came upon Saul as he sat in his house with his spear in his hand. This is a picture you've already seen. And David was playing the lyre. And Saul sought to, Saul sought to pin David to the wall with a spear, and he eluded Saul so that he struck the spear into the wall, and David fled and escaped that night. Saul sends messengers to David's house to watch him, that he might kill him in the morning. But Michal, David's wife, told him, if you do not escape with your life tonight, tomorrow you will be killed. So Michal, that's his wife, Saul's daughter, let David down through the window, and he fled and he escaped. And she took an image and laid it on the bed and put a pillow of goat's hair at its head and covered it with the clothes. And when Saul sent messengers to take David, she said, he's sick. And Saul sent messengers to see David, saying, bring him to me in the bed that I may kill him. Now this has gone, again, this is just, again, we're dealing with a crazy person. That he has now, in a very short amount of time, went from what we read, again, grammatically in the Hebrew, was genuine humility. In the moment, and that's part of Saul's problem, is he's thinking only in the short term. Right? In the moment, David won't die. But then again, what happened in the interim? David goes out, does things that he was ordered to do as a member of Saul's army to go kill Philistines, right? They're still at war with the Philistines. And that's also why we get some sense that this is not just, again, God sending this evil spirit. Almost every instance of this is right after David does something great, right? And so again, think about human emotion. You're somebody that already doesn't quite have a godly worldview. You're a little bit paranoid, you're a little bit power hungry, and then your greatest rival, your greatest opponent, whether that's perceived or real, is going and just crushing it. Then you kind of let your mind spiral. Well, now he's going to come after me. He's going to want to go be king. And then you fill in the again. That gives us some indication that it was at least in part in Saul's mind, because it's almost always just in response to David's success. Now, again, you could say, well, God's allowing David to succeed, and that's true, but Saul's still responsible for Saul, right? There is a godly way to have handled that, and Saul didn't do it. So but then that escalates, right? Now he's trying to send people to go kill him. But then in verse 11, down in verse 15, bring him to me in the bed that I may kill him. Saul has now evolved into, I don't want a messenger to kill him. I don't want another soldier to kill him. I want to kill him. And that's a whole nother animal that, again, David is going to continue to deal with. And when the messengers came in, behold, the image was in the bed with the pillow of goat's hair at its head. And Saul said to Michal, why have you deceived us? And let my enemy go so that he has escaped. And Michal answered Saul, he said to me, let me go. Why should I kill you? And now David fled and escaped. And he came to Samuel at Ramah and told him all that Saul had done. And he and Samuel went and lived at Naioth. And when he went to Saul, behold, David is at Naioth in Ramah. And Saul sent messengers to take David. And when they saw the company of the prophets prophesying and Samuel standing as the head over them, the Spirit of God came upon the messengers of Saul, and they prophesied. Now, important notation, your Bible may even have the ESV translate that word, the Hebrew word there, prophesied. That's an okay translation, but really, again, just think about what prophecy is at the broadest level. Even bona fide prophets that God himself picked did not always, tell the future like we sometimes assume they all did. Prophecy, as it's described here in the Hebrew, really just means worship in the most basic sense. It gets more specific than that, but if you were to just look up the Hebrew word, at the core, the root, just means worship. And that's what it is here. So again, our minds want to build a picture of Saul sending messengers to David, and they saw this great group of people, prophets prophesying, all telling the future and things like that. That's almost assuredly not the scene here. What the scene probably is all of these people with Samuel worshiping, praising God. And then the Spirit of God, again, kind of a unique work of the Spirit here, and again, a relatively rare, certainly more so than we see in the New Testament, but the Spirit of God came upon the messengers of Saul, and they also prophesied. Again, and especially the inclusion of the people sent by Saul gives us even a better understanding that this is probably not future-telling type prophecy, because we don't get really any instance in the Old Testament of people that God didn't pick to do that. All it means is they worshiped, they praised God. In a supernatural, again, the Spirit of God came upon them. But again, that really means praise and worship more than it does prophecy as we sometimes think. When that was told to Saul, he sent other messengers. They also prophesied, worship. Saul sent messengers again the third time. They prophesied, again, worship. And he asked, and he went to Ramah and came to the great well that is in Seku. And he said, "Where are Samuel and David?" And one said, "Behold, they're at Naioth and Ramah." And he went to Naioth and Ramah, and the Spirit of God came upon him also. And he went and he prophesied until he came to Naioth and Ramah. And he too stripped his clothes. He prophesied before Samuel, laid naked all that day and all that night. Thus it is said, is Saul among the prophets. Again, we look down through this and see this amazing example, again, of God providing for David, right? And that'll become a theme. I don't want to go too far into that because we're out of time tonight, and that is a major theme as we move forward. But keep reading into 1 Samuel. Again, chapter 20, 21, 22, you're going to continue to see Saul pulls back for the moment. Again, Saul is so frustrated that none of these messengers can handle it that he finally goes himself. And even he, again, God, the Spirit of the Lord, overtook him just like he had the others. And he, again, what an interesting response from Saul, right? The top guy. And the response, as made possible by the Spirit of the Lord, is to strip his clothes. And again, that gives us even a better understanding that it's not prophecy, future telling, because that clearly Saul is laying down before God, right? He's stripping his clothes in a cleansing, right? I'm not worthy. I have been wrong. That's what stripping his clothes meant. And then to worship before Samuel. And again, it's not saying he's worshiping Samuel. What it's saying is he is doing this before Samuel. And remember what Samuel was a prophet, was a representative of God. So he's coming in to the representative of God and is saying, I've been wrong, right? That's what that stripping of the clothes meant. And we look through this, and again, read into chapter 20. I'll give you, as we close up, I see three things. God, his protection is greater than any human scheme. And really that could just be summed up into God is greater than any human scheme. Whatever mankind wants to come up with, right? Whatever mankind wants to put together, whatever mankind wants to guess and control and dictate is always going to come short. It was true in Saul's day, it's true now. Again, God providentially takes care and in the background and will always be greater. Again, I reference this a lot, but that is the book of Hebrews, talking about Christ, but that is the essence, right? Whether it be prophets or whether it be angels or whether it be men of power, right? Governors, whatever it may be, Jesus is better. God is better. And that was still true in their day as well. Loyalty and courage in relationships matter. Again, Jonathan and David and their covenant relationship will continue to be a theme. I'll continue to reference it because it is as beautiful as the Bible has to offer us in terms of that just friendship relationship. Loyalty, courage, in spite of danger, right? Godly relationships call us to courage and sometimes personal risk to do what is right. Jonathan did it for David, right? David is going to, later on, will do it for Jonathan. And again, God is sovereign over all. Saul is going to send men to capture David, but God is in charge of it all, and David is his anointed to be king. And again, we've talked about this a lot, about the sovereignty, the providential connection to God. Does that mean that God is like a puppet master that manipulates and maneuvers? No, that's not the sense we get in the Old or the New Testament. But to say that God is disconnected from our world would be a misstep. God is still very much aware. God is still very much engaged. And it's my interpretation and belief that God very much works. Again, that's the providence of God. That is just simply to say God's background workings, right? And we get at different points of the Bible, you get more in the foreground, and then at different points you get more in the background, right? You've got stories like Esther that is almost completely in the background. But then you've got stories, some like we have in 1 and 2 Samuel, where God's working more in the foreground. We see that in the New Testament as well. But God's sovereignty will never change. Tonight, we want to offer the invitation to anybody that may have not accepted it, to put on Christ in baptism, to start that new relationship. If we can help you in any way, would you come and let us know about it tonight as we stand and as we sing together?